The first time Miss Evelyn Hartley saw the Duke of Westmarch's daughter, the child was standing alone at the top of a sweeping stone staircase, her small hands pressed flat against the iron balustrade, her dark hair ribboned but already coming loose. She looked less like the daughter of one of the wealthiest men in Yorkshire and more like a forgotten doll left behind in an empty house. Evelyn had been standing in the great hall for nearly a quarter of an hour, her travelling cloak still damp from the rain that had followed her all the way from York. The housekeeper, a severe woman with a ring of keys at her waist and a mouth that seemed permanently pursed, had taken her name and told her to wait. The hall smelled of cold stone and old smoke. Every footstep echoed. Every whisper from the servants' corridor seemed to carry too far. And above her, silent and watchful, the child remained. "That will be Lady Margaret," the housekeeper said, returning with a measured step. "She is not to be disturbed after supper." Evelyn looked up again. The little girl had not moved. She was perhaps 5 years old, small for her age, with a solemn face and eyes that seemed too large for it. Her dress was clean but plain, a pale grey wool that made her skin look even paler. There was no nurse beside her, no governess, no maid, only the child, alone in that great echoing space, observing a stranger, with a gravity that made Evelyn's chest tighten. "I understand," Evelyn said, though she did not look away from the child. The housekeeper led her through a maze of corridors to the west wing, where the servants' staircase gave way to a narrow passage, and then to a modest set of rooms. The schoolroom, she was informed, lay 2 floors above. The nursery was adjacent to Lady Margaret's bedchamber. Her duties would begin the following morning at 8. The Duke, she was told, had left instructions that he would meet her in the library at 9, after she had been introduced to his daughter. It was only when the door closed behind the housekeeper, and Evelyn was alone in her small, clean room, that she allowed herself to sit heavily on the edge of the bed. The rain had stopped. The window looked out over the formal gardens and, beyond them, the dark sweep of the park. Somewhere out there the land stretched for miles, all of it belonging to one man, and somewhere above her, a little girl was being put to bed by a servant who had probably learned long ago not to linger. Evelyn Hartley was 24 years old, the eldest daughter of a country physician, and she had taken this position because there was little else left for her. Her father had died the previous spring, leaving behind debts she had not known about until the creditors came. Her younger brother had gone to sea. Her mother had returned to her own family in Dorset. There had been a quiet understanding in the village that Evelyn would either marry a man she did not respect or find respectable work. She had chosen work. She had come to Blackmoor Priory expecting cold grandeur. What she had not expected was the silence. It settled over the house like a weight. Even the fire in her grate seemed to burn quietly, as if the house itself discouraged noise. She undressed slowly, folded her damp cloak over the back of the chair, and spent a long time standing at the window, watching the light fade over the hills. She did not see the Duke that night. She heard him, once, long after the house had gone still, a door closing somewhere in the east wing, the sound of boots on stone, and then nothing. It was nearly midnight, and she was still awake, listening to a house that felt as though it had forgotten how to be a home. The following morning, she rose before dawn, dressed in her grey woolen gown with the white collar, and pinned her hair back so tightly it pulled at her temples. She had learned long ago that neatness was a form of armor. The schoolroom was high in the west wing, a long room with tall windows facing the park, and it was cold despite the fire that a young maid had already lit. There were maps on the walls, a globe in the corner, a pianoforte against one wall, and a low table with a child's slate and chalk. The room was orderly but unused, as though no lesson had been taught there in some time. At 8 o'clock, the door opened, and Lady Margaret was brought in by her nursemaid, a tired-looking woman, with red hands, and a habit of sighing through her nose. The child stood in the doorway and looked at Evelyn with the same steady, unreadable gaze she had worn the night before. "Good morning, Lady Margaret," Evelyn said gently. "My name is Miss Hartley. I am to be your governess." The child said nothing. The nursemaid gave a slight shrug, as if to say this was exactly what she had expected, and then withdrew, closing the door behind her. Evelyn remained seated, her hands folded in her lap, and waited. She had worked with quiet children before. She knew better than to press. "You were in the hall last night," the child said at last. Her voice was small but clear. "Yes," Evelyn said. "I arrived yesterday evening. Are you going to stay?" There was no particular hope in the question. It was asked with the same detached curiosity with which a child might ask whether it would rain. "I hope so," Evelyn said. "I have come to teach you." Lady Margaret walked slowly to the window and looked out at the park. The light was thin and grey, the lawns still wet from the previous day's rain. For a long time she said nothing. Then, without turning around, she said, "They always go away." Evelyn opened her mouth to speak, then closed it. It would have been easy to offer reassurance, to promise that she was different, but she had no right to make such a promise. She had only just arrived. She did not yet know the shape of this house or the people in it. She did not yet know anything at all. At 9 o'clock, she left Lady Margaret with the nursemaid and made her way to the library. It was on the ground floor, at the end of a long gallery hung with portraits of men and women in heavy frames. The faces followed her as she walked, their eyes flat and distant. By the time she reached the library door, her heart was beating uncomfortably fast. The Duke of Westmarch was standing at the window with his back to the room. He was taller than she had expected, broad across the shoulders, his dark hair touched with grey at the temples. He wore a plain dark coat and boots that had been polished to a quiet gleam, and he held a letter in one hand, though he did not appear to be reading it. When he turned, Evelyn felt an unexpected jolt of recognition, as though she had seen him before, in a dream she could not quite recall. His face was lean, the features strong and somewhat severe, and his eyes were a shade of grey that seemed to change with the light. He looked at her for a long moment without speaking, and she had the uncomfortable sensation that he was taking in far more than her appearance. "Miss Hartley," he said. His voice was low and measured. "I trust your journey was not too difficult." "Not at all, Your Grace." He nodded once, then gestured toward a chair. She sat, folding her hands carefully in her lap. The room smelled of leather and old paper, and a fire burned in the grate, though it did little to warm the high ceiling. "You have met my daughter?" "Yes, Your Grace. She was brought to the schoolroom this morning." "She rarely speaks to strangers." The Duke turned the letter over in his hands, his expression unreadable. "I have employed 4 governesses in the last 2 years. None of them remained beyond a few months." Evelyn did not look away. "May I ask why, Your Grace?" He considered the question for a moment, as though deciding how much truth she was owed. "Some found the isolation difficult. Others found my daughter impossible to manage. One of them wrote to me from London to say that she considered the child unnatural." His jaw tightened. "I do not wish to employ another woman who will abandon her." The words were delivered without self-pity, but Evelyn heard the anger beneath them. It was the controlled anger of a man who had learned long ago not to show emotion. She thought of the little girl standing alone at the top of the staircase, watching her with eyes too old for her face. "I cannot promise you that I will never leave, Your Grace," she said quietly. "I do not believe in making promises I cannot keep, but I will promise you this. I will do my best for your daughter, and I will not leave her without cause." The Duke regarded her in silence for what felt like a long time. Then he gave a single nod. "That is more honest than anything I have heard from the others." He set the letter down on the desk. "You will report to me weekly regarding her progress. If there are difficulties, you will bring them to me directly. I do not tolerate gossip among the servants, and I will not have my daughter spoken of as though she were a curiosity." "I understand, Your Grace." "Do you, Miss Hartley?" He looked at her with that sharp grey gaze, and for a moment she felt as though he were testing her, waiting for her to flinch or look away. "You will hear things in this house. You will be told things by people who imagine they know the truth. I expect you to remember that Lady Margaret is a child, not a scandal." "I am not easily frightened by gossip, Your Grace." The faintest flicker of something, surprise, perhaps, crossed his face. Then it was gone. "Very well," he said. "You may begin your duties. I will send for you at the end of the week." Evelyn rose and curtsied. She was at the door when he spoke again. "Miss Hartley." She turned. The Duke was still standing by the window, the letter in his hand. "My daughter does not like to be touched without warning," he said. "She will not always meet your eyes. It is not defiance. It is simply who she is." "I understand, Your Grace." He nodded once, and she left the library, closing the door softly behind her. She walked slowly back along the gallery, past the watching portraits, and she thought about what he had said. It was not a warning, she realized. It was an instruction. He had told her how to reach his daughter, and she had the distinct feeling that such guidance had not been offered to any of the previous governesses. When she returned to the schoolroom, Lady Margaret was sitting at the low table with a piece of chalk in her hand. She looked up as Evelyn entered, then returned to her drawing. The slate was covered in small, careful lines that might have been bars or branches or the beginnings of a cage. Evelyn sat down across from her and folded her hands on the table. "Your father told me that you do not like to be touched without warning," she said gently. "I will remember that." Lady Margaret's hand stilled. She looked up, her dark eyes searching Evelyn's face with an intensity that was almost painful. Then she nodded once and resumed her drawing. The weeks that followed were not easy. Lady Margaret was a child of sudden silences and unpredictable storms. She could spend an hour copying her letters with painstaking care, then hurl the slate across the room when a sound startled her. She refused to eat in the dining room, preferring to take her meals in the nursery, and she would not sleep unless the window was open, even on the coldest nights. The nursemaid, a woman named Mrs. Poole, had long since stopped trying to understand her. She did what was required, and nothing more, and she watched Evelyn's efforts with a kind of weary amusement. "She'll wear you down," Mrs. Poole said one afternoon, as they watched the child crouched in the garden, examining a line of ants. "They all think they can save her. Her mother couldn't. Her father can't. What makes you think you're any different?" Evelyn did not answer. She was watching the child, who had lain down on the damp grass to press her cheek against the ground, the ants forgotten. There was something in the way Lady Margaret sought out small physical sensations, the roughness of bark, the coldness of stone, the pressure of her own hands against her face, that made Evelyn think she understood something the others had missed. The child was not unnatural. She was overwhelmed. The world came at her too loudly, too brightly, too fast, and she had learned to shut it out, because no one had ever taught her how to bear it. That evening, Evelyn did something she had not planned to do. She went to the Duke's study, not because she had been summoned, but because she had information he needed. He was seated at his desk, surrounded by papers, and he looked up with a flicker of surprise when she was announced. "Forgive the intrusion, Your Grace," she said. "I wish to speak with you about Lady Margaret." He set down his pen and leaned back in his chair. "What has happened?" "Nothing alarming," Evelyn said, "but I have observed some things that I believe may explain her difficulties. She is not a difficult child by nature. She is an overwhelmed one. Certain sounds, certain fabrics, certain smells, they distress her in ways that she cannot articulate. When she becomes agitated, it is not rebellion, it is distress." The Duke listened without interrupting, his grey eyes fixed on her face. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment. "You are the first person to say that to me," he said at last. "The others called her cold. They said she refused affection. They said she was willful." "She is not cold," Evelyn said. "She is frightened. There is a difference." He rose from his chair and walked to the fireplace, his back to her. The fire cast long shadows across the room. "Her mother died when she was 3 years old. It was sudden. One morning she was here, and by nightfall she was gone. Margaret was in the room when it happened. She saw things no child should see." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was lower. "I have spent 2 years trying to help her. I have brought in physicians. I have consulted specialists in London. None of them offered anything useful. They said she would outgrow it. They said she was simply grieving." "Perhaps she is still grieving," Evelyn said quietly. "But that does not mean she cannot also be helped." The Duke turned to face her. In the firelight his face looked older, wearier, and for the first time she saw the strain he carried. It was the strain of a man who had lost his wife, and was watching his daughter slip away from him, and who had no idea how to stop it. "What do you propose?" "Small changes," Evelyn said. "Consistency, warning before transitions, predictability in her daily routine, time outdoors when the weather permits, and patience." She hesitated. "She needs to know that someone will not leave. That will take longer than anything else." You are asking me to trust you with the most important person in my life, he said slowly. I do not trust easily, Miss Hartley. I am not asking for your trust, Your Grace. I am asking for your daughter's. He regarded her for a long moment, then gave a short nod. Do what you believe is best. I will not interfere. She curtsied and turned to go, but his voice stopped her once more. Miss Hartley. She looked back. Thank you, he said. It was the first time she had ever heard a duke sound like a father. By the following spring, the household had begun to speak of Lady Margaret differently. She no longer screamed when the kitchen bell rang. She had stopped hiding beneath the bed when visitors arrived. She could sit through a full meal in the nursery without throwing her plate, and she had begun to speak to Evelyn in sentences longer than a few words. The progress was slow and uneven, and there were still days when the child retreated into herself like a snail into its shell. But there were also moments of startling clarity, when Lady Margaret would look up from her lessons and ask a question that revealed a sharp, observant mind. Why does the housekeeper dislike my mother? She asked one afternoon, not long after her 6th birthday. Evelyn looked up from the book she was reading aloud. What makes you think she dislikes your mother? She makes a face when she says her name. Lady Margaret frowned, a small crease appearing between her brows. Like this. She screwed up her features into an exaggerated grimace. Evelyn suppressed a smile. I think she may have her own reasons for that expression. It is not for us to judge. Did you know my mother? No, Evelyn said. I arrived after she had passed. Lady Margaret was quiet for a moment, tracing her finger along the edge of the table. I do not remember her, she said. Sometimes I think I do, but then it goes away, like a dream. She looked up. Do you think that is wrong, not remembering your own mother? Evelyn set down the book. I think it is very common. You were very young when she died. Memory is not always reliable at that age. Father remembers her, the child said. When he talks about her, his face changes. He looks sad and angry at the same time. Grief can feel like that, Evelyn said carefully. It can make people feel many different things at once. Lady Margaret considered this, her small face serious. Then she said, Miss Hartley, will you stay? The question took Evelyn by surprise. It had been nearly 8 months since she had arrived, longer than any of the previous governesses. I have no plans to leave, she said. That is not the same as staying, the child pointed out. Evelyn smiled. You are too clever for me. Very well. I will stay as long as I am able. Does that satisfy you? Lady Margaret nodded once, a solemn little gesture, and returned to her lesson. But something in Evelyn's chest shifted, a quiet awareness that she had made a promise she intended to keep. And beneath that awareness was another, more troubling one, that the child was not the only reason she wished to remain at Blackmoor Priory. She had tried not to notice the Duke. It was impossible, of course. He was a force of nature, a man whose presence filled whatever room he entered. But she had kept her distance, treating him with the formal respect due his rank, never lingering after their weekly meetings, never allowing her gaze to rest on him longer than necessary. She told herself it was because she was a servant in his household, and he was one of the wealthiest men in England. She told herself it was because such thoughts were inappropriate and unprofessional. But the truth was simpler and far more dangerous. She was drawn to him in ways she could not explain, and she was terrified that he would see it. He did see it, eventually. She was certain of it. It happened on an evening in early autumn, when the air had turned sharp, and the trees in the park were beginning to show the first colors of the season. Evelyn had taken Lady Margaret outside to collect leaves for a nature lesson, and they had stayed out longer than intended. By the time they returned to the house, the child was exhausted and covered in mud, and Evelyn's hair had come loose from its pins. They were crossing the great hall when the Duke appeared at the top of the stairs. He looked at his daughter, then at Evelyn, and there was a moment, brief, almost imperceptible, when something in his expression softened. It was not amusement exactly. It was something warmer, something that made Evelyn's face heat in a way that had nothing to do with the cold air outside. You have been enjoying yourselves, he said. We collected leaves, Father, Lady Margaret said. Miss Hartley says we may press them in a book. Did she? He looked at Evelyn, and the corner of his mouth lifted. It was not quite a smile, but it was close. Then I shall look forward to seeing them. He continued down the stairs and disappeared into the library, and Evelyn stood there in the hall, holding a basket of wet leaves, her heart pounding in a way that frightened her. The child tugged at her sleeve, asking something about supper, and she forced herself to move, to speak, to behave as though nothing had happened. But something had happened. She could feel it. The careful distance she had maintained was beginning to crack, and she did not know whether to run from it or let it break. That winter, a visitor came to Blackmoor Priory. His name was Sir Edmund Blount, and he arrived in a gleaming black carriage, with a coat of arms painted on the door, and a small army of servants trailing behind him. He was the Duke's cousin, a man of perhaps 40, with a soft, pale face and a smile that never reached his eyes. He was charming in the way that men who want something are charming, his compliments flowing easily, his laughter just a little too loud. Lady Margaret disliked him immediately, though she could not articulate why. "He smiles too much," she said to Evelyn one evening, after Sir Edmund had spent an hour in the schoolroom attempting to win her over with a gift of sugared almonds. "And he looks at me like he is waiting for something." "Perhaps he is simply unused to children," Evelyn said, though she privately agreed with the child's assessment. There was something about Sir Edmund that made the hair on the back of her neck prickle. He had arrived without warning, had inserted himself into the household with an ease that suggested he expected to stay, and he spent far too much time closeted with the Duke in the library. The purpose of his visit became clear soon enough. One evening, as Evelyn was making her way through the servants' corridor on her way back from the kitchen, she overheard two footmen talking in low voices. "He wants the Duke to remarry," one of them said. "He's got a sister in London, a widow, says it would be good for the family." "What does the Duke say?" "Nothing. He never says anything. But Sir Edmund won't leave it alone. Keeps telling him the girl needs a mother." Evelyn paused in the shadows, her heart beating hard. She knew she should not listen. It was not her place. But she remained where she was, hidden in the darkness, until the footmen moved on. Then she walked slowly back to her room, her mind turning over what she had heard. A wife. Sir Edmund wanted the Duke to marry his widowed sister, and he was using Lady Margaret as the justification, a motherless child who needed a woman's hand. It was a clever argument, calculated to appeal to a father's guilt. Evelyn thought of the Duke's face when he spoke of his daughter, the careful control, the grief barely hidden, and she thought of what it would mean if he agreed. A stranger in this house, a new duchess, a woman who might not understand Lady Margaret, who might send her away to school, or dismiss the governess, or undo all the fragile progress they had made. The thought made her sick. She told herself it was only concern for the child, but deep down, she knew it was more than that. It was jealousy, pure and simple, and she was ashamed of it. The following morning, she was summoned to the library. The Duke was alone, seated behind his desk, and there were lines of tension around his mouth that had not been there the day before. He did not ask her to sit. "I understand you have been speaking with Lady Margaret about her mother," he said. Evelyn blinked, caught off guard. "We have spoken of her, yes. She asked me whether it was wrong that she could not remember her." "And what did you tell her?" "I told her it was common, that memory is not always reliable at that age." He leaned back in his chair, studying her. "Sir Edmund believes I should remarry. He has made his case quite forcefully over the past several days. He believes my daughter requires a mother, and that I have been remiss in not providing her with one." Evelyn's mouth went dry. "I was not aware of Sir Edmund's opinions, Your Grace." "No? I thought perhaps you had heard something. Servants talk." "They always do." He paused, and his grey eyes narrowed slightly. "I am not asking what you have heard, Miss Hartley. I am asking for your opinion." "My opinion, Your Grace?" "You spend more time with my daughter than anyone else in this house. You know her better than I do, perhaps better than I have allowed myself to." He rose and walked to the window, his back to her. "I want to know whether you believe she needs a mother." The question hung in the air between them. Evelyn felt the weight of it, the danger of answering honestly, but she had promised herself long ago that she would not lie to him. "I believe she needs to be loved, Your Grace," she said carefully. "I believe she needs stability and patience, and people who understand her. Whether that comes from a mother or a father or a governess, I cannot say." But I do not believe that marrying a stranger simply to provide her with a mother would serve her interests. She would see through it. She would know she was being managed. The Duke turned to face her. You are very direct, Miss Hartley. You asked for my opinion, Your Grace. A faint smile touched his lips, gone almost before it appeared. So I did. He returned to his desk and sat down. Sir Edmund leaves for London in 3 days. I have not agreed to anything, nor will I, but I wanted to hear from someone who actually knows my daughter. He looked at her for a long moment. Thank you for your honesty. She curtsied and left the room, her heart still hammering. That night, she lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the Duke and his daughter, and the strange, painful hope that was beginning to take root inside her. Sir Edmund left as scheduled, though not before making one final attempt to press his case. Evelyn witnessed the end of it by accident. She was crossing the upper gallery, on her way to the schoolroom, when she heard raised voices from below. She stopped, hidden behind a marble column, and looked down into the great hall. The Duke stood facing his cousin, his expression cold. Sir Edmund was red-faced, gesturing emphatically with one hand. You are making a mistake, Westmarch, he was saying. You cannot keep that girl shut up here forever. She will grow up strange, unfit for society. People already talk. They say she is touched in the head, that her mother's madness bred true. Be careful, the Duke said. His voice was low, dangerously quiet. You are speaking of my wife and my daughter. I am speaking of reality. I am offering you a solution, and you are too proud to take it. A sensible marriage, a woman of good family who understands how things are done in London, and the girl can be sent to a decent school, where she will learn to behave like a lady, instead of a wild animal. Evelyn's hand tightened on the railing. Below her, the Duke took a single step toward his cousin. My daughter, he said, will never be sent away to be broken by people who do not understand her. I would sooner see this house fall to ruin than allow another person to tell me what she is or is not capable of. Sir Edmund sneered. You are a fool, cousin. You always were. Your father knew it too. That is why he left the estate to me in trust until you produced an heir. But you have no heir, do you? Only a daughter who will never marry and never give you what you need to keep this place intact. The words struck Evelyn like a blow. She saw the Duke's face change, saw the anger flash in his grey eyes, and for a moment she thought he would strike his cousin, but he did not. He stood very still, his hands at his sides, and when he spoke, his voice was like ice. Leave this house, he said, and do not return until you are sent for. Sir Edmund laughed, a short, ugly sound. I will leave, but this is not over, Westmarch. It is not over by any stretch. He turned and walked out of the great hall, his boots echoing on the stone. The Duke remained where he was, his back to the stairs, his shoulders rigid. Evelyn pressed herself against the column, barely breathing. She had not meant to overhear. She had not meant to learn the truth about the estate, about the trust, about the heir the Duke had never produced. But now that she knew, she could not unknown it. After a long moment, the Duke moved. He walked slowly toward the library, his steps heavy, and disappeared through the door. Evelyn waited until she was certain he was gone, then slipped back the way she had come. Her mind was reeling. The estate was not entirely his. His father had tied it up in some kind of trust, and Sir Edmund stood to benefit if the Duke failed to produce an heir. A son, that was what they wanted. A son to inherit, to carry the title forward, to secure the family's future. And Lady Margaret, who was worth more than any title, was being dismissed as a burden. It was monstrous, it was cruel, and it explained far more than Evelyn cared to admit. That evening, she was summoned to the Duke's study for her weekly report. It was a ritual they had maintained since her arrival, and she had come to dread it in ways she could not quite explain. The room was too intimate, the fire too warm, the Duke too close. She stood just inside the doorway, her hands folded, and waited for him to speak. He did not speak. He sat at his desk, staring at a paper in front of him, and for a long time the only sound was the crackle of the fire. Then he looked up, and she saw that the anger from the afternoon had faded into something else. Weariness, perhaps, or resignation. I am told you have been teaching Margaret to read poetry, he said. Evelyn blinked. Yes, Your Grace. Simple verses. She has a good ear for rhythm. She has always liked music. Her mother played the harp. He set down the paper. I came upon her yesterday afternoon, sitting in the garden, reciting something to herself. I could not hear the words, but her face was peaceful. That is not something I have seen in a long time. He paused. You have done more for her in these few months than I have managed in years. That is not true, Your Grace, Evelyn said. She adores you. She speaks of you constantly. Does she? He looked surprised. I did not think she noticed me much at all. Children notice everything, especially children like Margaret. She hesitated. She knows you are grieving. She does not know how to speak of it. The Duke was silent for a long moment. Then he rose and walked to the window, the same window where she had first seen him standing all those months ago. I have failed her, he said quietly. In ways I cannot undo. I was so lost in my own grief that I could not see hers. By the time I understood what was happening, she had already begun to retreat from the world. He turned to face her. You have begun to bring her back. That is not a small thing, Miss Hartley. It is everything. Evelyn's throat tightened. I have only done what seemed right, she said. She is an extraordinary child, Your Grace. She simply needed someone to listen. And you listened. He held her gaze, and there was something in his eyes that made her pulse quicken. I have spent 3 years surrounded by people who tell me what I want to hear. You are the first person who has told me the truth. She did not know what to say. The air between them felt charged, heavy with unspoken things. She should have looked away. She should have curtsied and excused herself and returned to her room. But she did not move. She stood there, rooted to the spot, while the Duke of Westmarch looked at her, as though he was seeing her for the first time. My cousin wants me to marry his widowed sister, he said abruptly. He has made no secret of it. He believes it would solve a great many problems. The estate, the succession, Margaret's future. He paused. What do you think of that? Evelyn's mouth went dry. I think, she said carefully, that you should not marry for anyone's sake but your own. And Margaret's, if she is to be considered, but not for Sir Edmund's. The faintest hint of a smile crossed his face. I was not aware that I had asked for your blessing. You asked for my opinion, Your Grace. So I did. He was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was softer. Do you know why my father placed the estate in trust, Miss Hartley? She shook her head. Because he did not trust me. He said it without bitterness, as though he were stating a simple fact. He believed I was too proud, too stubborn, too unwilling to do what was necessary for the family. When my wife died, he thought I would fall apart, and I did, for a time. He saw that as confirmation of my weakness. So he arranged for the trust, with Sir Edmund as one of the trustees. If I die without a legitimate male heir, the estate will pass to Sir Edmund and his line. That is monstrous, Evelyn said, before she could stop herself. The Duke raised an eyebrow. You think so? I think a man should not be punished for loving his wife and daughter, she said firmly. And I think any man who would use a child's future as leverage against her father is not a man to be trusted. He studied her for a long moment. You are an unusual woman, Miss Hartley. I have been told that before, Your Grace. It is not always meant as a compliment. I mean it as one. He took a step toward her, and her breath caught. I am going to London next week. There are legal matters to attend to. When I return, I would like to speak with you again. Of course, Your Grace. Another step. He was close enough now that she could see the flecks of darker grey in his eyes, the faint scar above his right eyebrow, the way his jaw tightened when he was restraining some strong emotion. What I have to say, he said slowly, is not appropriate for a conversation between a duke and his daughter's governess. Evelyn's heart was pounding so hard she was certain he could hear it. Then perhaps, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, you should not say it until it is appropriate. He looked at her for a long, breathless moment. Then he inclined his head. Perhaps not. He stepped back, and the spell broke. Evelyn curtsied and left the room as quickly as she could, her skirts rustling against the stone floor. She did not stop until she reached her own chamber, where she closed the door and pressed her back against it, her hands shaking. He was going to London, and when he returned, he wanted to speak with her. She did not know what he intended to say, but she knew what she had seen in his eyes. It was not the look of a duke speaking to a servant. It was the look of a man speaking to a woman he could not have. That night, she lay awake for hours, and when she finally slept, she dreamed of him. He was standing in the garden in the rain, reaching for her, and she was running toward him through the wet grass, and when she woke, her face was wet with tears. The Duke left for London the following week. In his absence, the household settled into a strange, suspended quiet. Lady Margaret missed her father acutely, though she would not say so directly. Instead, she asked questions about when he would return, checking the front drive every afternoon, pressing her face against the glass in the upstairs window. "He always comes back," she said one evening, as Evelyn tucked her into bed. "He always does." "Of course he does," Evelyn said. "He loves you very much." Lady Margaret was silent for a moment, her small face serious. "Do you love him?" Evelyn's hands stilled on the blanket. "Why do you ask that?" "Because he looks at you the way Mr. Whitfield looks at Mrs. Poole." Evelyn felt her face flush. "I think you may be imagining things." "I do not imagine things," the child said matter-of-factly. "I notice them. That is different." She paused. "If you married him, would you be my mother?" The question was so direct, so unexpected, that Evelyn could not speak for a moment. When she finally found her voice, it was unsteady. "That is not something you need to worry about," she said. "Your father has made no such plans." "But if he did," the child persisted, "would you stay?" Evelyn looked at the little girl's face, at the hope she was trying so hard to hide, and something inside her cracked. "Yes," she said softly, "I would stay." Lady Margaret nodded once, as though this settled the matter, and closed her eyes. Evelyn remained beside the bed until the child's breathing slowed into sleep. Then she went to the window and looked out at the dark park, and she allowed herself, for the first time, to imagine what it might be like to be the Duchess of Westmarch. The vision was intoxicating and terrifying. She pushed it away, but it lingered at the edges of her thoughts, returning in quiet moments, refusing to be banished. Sir Edmund returned before the Duke did. He arrived on a cold morning in late November, without warning, and announced that he would be staying for several days. Mrs. Poole brought the news to the schoolroom, her expression grim. "He is in the East Wing," she said. "He brought his sister with him." Evelyn's blood ran cold. "His sister? Lady Arabella Fairchild. She is a widow, I believe. Very fashionable." Mrs. Poole's lip curled. "She has already asked to see the schoolroom. I told her it was not convenient." "Why does she want to see the schoolroom?" Mrs. Poole gave her a long, knowing look. "She wants to see you," she said. "She wants to know who has been caring for Lady Margaret." Lady Arabella Fairchild was everything Evelyn had feared. She was tall and elegant, with honey-coloured hair and a wardrobe of expensive mourning silks that made her look more like a woman attending a London ball than one grieving a husband. She arrived at the schoolroom door that afternoon, flanked by Sir Edmund, and smiled at Evelyn with perfect, practiced courtesy. "You must be Miss Hartley," she said. "My cousin has told me so much about you." Evelyn curtsied. "Lady Fairchild." "I do hope you will forgive the intrusion. I am so anxious to meet dear little Margaret. Her father speaks of her with such affection." She glanced around the schoolroom, her eyes taking in the maps, the books, the child's drawings pinned to the wall. What a charming room, and so rural. "It serves its purpose," Evelyn said evenly. Lady Arabella's smile tightened. "I am sure it does." She turned to Lady Margaret, who was sitting at the low table with her slate, watching the visitors with the wary stillness of a small animal scenting danger. "Good afternoon, Lady Margaret. I am your cousin Arabella. I have brought you a gift." She produced a small, beribboned box from her reticule and held it out. Lady Margaret did not move. She looked at the box, then at Lady Arabella's face, then at Evelyn, as if seeking instruction. "Lady Fairchild has brought you something," Evelyn said gently. "You may take it if you wish." Lady Margaret rose slowly and crossed the room. She took the box with both hands, careful not to touch Lady Arabella's fingers, and returned to her seat. For a moment, she simply held it, turning it over in her hands. "Open it, child," Sir Edmund said. His voice was impatient, his smile fixed. It will not bite. Lady Margaret looked at him, and then, very deliberately, set the box down on the table without opening it. I will open it later, she said, when I am alone. Sir Edmund's smile vanished. That is rather ungrateful, Margaret. When someone gives you a gift, you open it in their presence. She is not being ungrateful, Evelyn said quietly. She is being careful. She does not know you, and she prefers to approach new things in her own time. I am her cousin, Sir Edmund snapped. I have known her since she was born. She was very young when you last visited, Evelyn said. She does not remember you. Sir Edmund's face reddened. He opened his mouth to reply, but Lady Arabella placed a hand on his arm. Of course, she said smoothly. Children have their little quirks. We must be patient with them. She smiled at Evelyn, but her eyes were cold. You clearly understand her well, Miss Hartley. How fortunate that my cousin was able to find someone so dedicated. There was a hint of something in her voice, something dismissive, that made Evelyn's jaw tighten, but she said nothing. She had been well trained in the art of not responding to insult. The visitors departed soon after, leaving a cloud of French perfume and tension in their wake. Lady Margaret waited until the door closed, then looked at Evelyn. I do not like them, she said. I know, Evelyn said. They want father to marry her. It was not a question. I believe that is their intention. Lady Margaret frowned. She smells like flowers that have gone stale, she said. And she looks at me like I am a problem she has to solve. Evelyn nearly laughed. You are very observant. I told you. I notice things. The child picked up the beribboned box and held it at arm's length. I am going to put this in the fire. You are not going to put it in the fire. It might be valuable. Then I will give it to Mrs. Poole. She can sell it. Lady Margaret set the box down with a decisive thud. I do not want anything from her. The following morning, Evelyn was walking through the lower corridor when she encountered Lady Arabella. The woman was alone, standing before a portrait of the late Duchess, her expression unreadable. She turned as Evelyn approached, and her smile was polite but faintly challenging. I have been admiring the painting, Lady Arabella said. She was very beautiful, was she not? I understand so, Evelyn said carefully. You never met her? No. I arrived after her death. Lady Arabella turned back to the portrait. She was charming. Everyone loved her. But she was also rather fragile. Some women are, you know. They are not suited to the burdens of such a position. She paused. I imagine it must be difficult for a woman of your background to understand such things. Evelyn's hands folded tightly in front of her. I understand more than you might think, Lady Fairchild. Do you? Lady Arabella turned to face her fully. I wonder. You have made quite an impression on my cousin's household. Some might even say you have made an impression on my cousin himself. Her smile tightened. But then, men are often susceptible to that sort of thing, are they not? A pretty face, a sympathetic ear. It is a familiar story. Evelyn felt the heat rise in her cheeks, but she kept her voice steady. I am a governess, Lady Fairchild. My duty is to Lady Margaret, that is all. Is it? Lady Arabella took a step toward her. I do hope so, for your own sake. She tilted her head, studying Evelyn with the dispassionate interest of a woman examining a potentially troublesome insect. Because if I were to discover that you had been entertaining ambitions beyond your station, I would feel compelled to protect my family's interests, and I can be very persuasive when I wish to be. She did not wait for a reply. She swept past Evelyn, her silks rustling, and disappeared around the corner. Evelyn stood where she was, her heart pounding, her hands clenched so tightly that her nails bit into her palms. It was a warning, a threat, delivered with a smile. And it left her in no doubt. Lady Arabella Fairchild intended to become the next Duchess of Westmarch, and she would not allow anyone, least of all a governess, to stand in her way. The Duke returned 3 days later. He arrived in the early evening, just as the first snow began to fall. Evelyn saw his carriage from the schoolroom window, a dark shape emerging from the white dusk, and she felt her heart leap despite every attempt to keep it still. Lady Margaret saw it too and let out a small cry of excitement, abandoning her lesson to press her face against the glass. He is home, she said. He is home, Miss Hartley. Yes, Evelyn said. He is home. She did not see him that night. The household was in an uproar, serving dinner to Sir Edmund and Lady Arabella, and Evelyn kept to the west wing with the child. But she knew he was there, somewhere in the east wing, and the knowledge made the house feel different, fuller, warmer, more alive. The following morning, a note arrived at her door. It was brief, written in the Duke's firm hand. "I will come to the schoolroom at 3 o'clock. I wish to speak with you then." She read it twice, her hands trembling slightly. Then she folded it carefully and tucked it into the pocket of her gown. All day, she was distracted, her thoughts scattering like startled birds. Lady Margaret noticed, of course. The child noticed everything. "You are nervous," she said during their afternoon lesson. "Your hands are shaking." "I am cold," Evelyn said. Lady Margaret gave her a long, skeptical look. "It is not cold in here. The fire is burning." She paused. "Is it because father has returned?" "Why would your father's return make me nervous?" "I do not know," the child admitted. "But something is different about you." At 3 o'clock, Evelyn sent Lady Margaret to the nursery for her afternoon rest. She straightened her gown, smoothed her hair, and waited. When the Duke entered the schoolroom, she was standing by the window, her hands clasped behind her back to keep them still. He closed the door behind him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The room was quiet, except for the crackling of the fire and the distant whisper of the wind outside. "I have been thinking about you," he said at last. "All the way to London and back. I could not stop." Evelyn's breath caught. "Your Grace, when I am with you, I forget that I am the Duke of Westmarch." He took a step toward her, then another. "I forget the estate, the trust, my cousin, everything. When I am with you, I am simply a man." He stopped a few feet away, his grey eyes searching her face. "I have not felt like a man in a long time." She wanted to look away, but she could not. "You should not say these things to me," she whispered. "I know," he said. "I have told myself the same thing every day for months. It does not help." He took another step, close enough now that she could feel the warmth of him. "I am going to ask you something, Miss Hartley, and I need you to answer me honestly." Her heart was racing. "What is it? Do you feel anything for me?" His voice was low, rough. "Anything at all, beyond the duty of a governess to her employer?" She opened her mouth to deny it, to deflect, to retreat behind the safety of her position. But the words would not come. The truth was too big, too powerful, and it had been locked inside her for too long. "Yes," she said, "I do." For a long moment, he simply looked at her. Then, slowly, he lifted his hand and touched her cheek. His fingers were warm, calloused, impossibly gentle. She closed her eyes, leaning into the touch, and felt tears slipping down her face. "I have been alone for so long," he said softly. "I did not know how much I needed someone until you came into this house and refused to leave." She opened her eyes. "I could not leave," she said. "Margaret needed me. And I need you." He cupped her face in both hands, and there was a fierce tenderness in his eyes that made her chest ache. "I know this is impossible. I know the world will not understand. But I cannot pretend any longer. I cannot watch you across the room and pretend that you are only my daughter's governess." "Then do not pretend," she whispered. He kissed her. It was not a gentle kiss. It was desperate, hungry, the kiss of a man who had been starving for something he had never allowed himself to name. She clung to him, her fingers twisting in his coat, and for a long, dizzying moment, the rest of the world fell away. There was only him, his mouth on hers, his hands in her hair, his body solid and warm against her own. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard. He rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed. "I am going to marry you," he said. "I do not care what anyone says. I am going to marry you, and you are going to be my Duchess, and Margaret will have the mother she has been waiting for." Evelyn let out a shaky laugh. "You cannot simply decide that." "I am a duke," he said, opening his eyes. "I can decide whatever I wish." He smiled, a real smile, and the effect was dazzling. "But first, I have to deal with my cousin." The mention of Sir Edmund brought reality crashing back down. Evelyn pulled away slightly, her expression changing. "He is here," she said. "He brought Lady Arabella. They are staying in the East Wing." The Duke's smile faded. I know. I saw them last night. His jaw tightened. He has been pressuring me again. He says the trustees are growing impatient, that I must produce an heir, or risk losing the estate to him. He thinks that by offering me his sister, he is offering me a solution. And what do you think? I think he is a viper, who would like nothing better than to see me fail. He took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. But he has made a mistake. He has underestimated me. He looked at her, and there was something hard and determined in his eyes. I have spent so long grieving, but I am done with grief. I am going to fight for this estate, for my daughter, and for you. Evelyn felt a surge of emotion so strong it nearly overwhelmed her. What can I do? Stay with me, he said simply. That is all I ask. She nodded, tears stinging her eyes. I will stay. The days that followed were strange and wonderful and terrifying all at once. The Duke did not announce their engagement immediately. He was careful, deliberate, moving with the patience of a man who knew his enemy and intended to outmaneuver him. He spent his days closeted with his lawyers, reviewing documents, sending letters. Sir Edmund watched him with growing suspicion, while Lady Arabella hovered at the edges of the household like a cat waiting to pounce. But in the quiet moments, when the house was still and the snow fell softly outside, the Duke would find his way to the schoolroom. He would sit with his daughter, while she showed him her drawings, and he would watch Evelyn with an intensity that made her skin tingle. Sometimes, when the child was not looking, he would brush his fingers against hers, a brief, secret touch that promised more. He is courting you, Lady Margaret announced one afternoon, apropos of nothing. Evelyn nearly dropped the book she was holding. What makes you say that? He brings you flowers. He sits too close to you at supper. He looks at you when you are not looking. The child ticked off each point on her fingers. Also, he asked me yesterday what I would think if you were to live here always. Evelyn's heart stopped. What did you tell him? I said I would like it very much. Lady Margaret looked up from her slate, her dark eyes serious. I would like it, Miss Hartley. I would like it very much indeed. The first open confrontation came a week later. The Duke had announced that he would host a dinner for a small party of neighbours. Nothing grand, merely a gesture to re-establish social connections after years of seclusion. Sir Edmund had been against it, arguing that it was inappropriate given the family's circumstances, but the Duke had overruled him. The dinner was to take place on the first Friday of December, and the entire household was consumed with preparations. Evelyn had not expected to attend. She was the governess, after all. But 3 days before the dinner, the Duke summoned her to his study, and informed her that she would be present. I cannot attend a formal dinner, she said, stunned. I have nothing to wear, and it would be highly irregular. Irregular? The Duke raised an eyebrow. I am about to marry my daughter's governess. I think we are beyond concerns about irregularity. Her face flushed. You have not told anyone yet. Not yet, but I intend to. He came around the desk and took her hands. I want you at that dinner, Evelyn. I want the county to see you. I want them to know that you are not something I am ashamed of, but something I am proud of. She stared at him, her heart pounding. They will talk. Let them talk. He squeezed her hands. I have spent my entire life caring what others think. I am done with it. The dress arrived 2 days later. It was deep green silk, simple but elegant, and it fit as though it had been made for her. Evelyn stood before the mirror in her room, turning slowly, and felt like a woman in a dream. She had never owned anything so beautiful. She had never imagined she might. The night of the dinner, the great hall blazed with candlelight. Evelyn descended the staircase with her chin lifted and her heart in her throat, feeling the eyes of the guests upon her. The Duke was waiting at the bottom, resplendent in his evening dress, and when he saw her, the look on his face stole the breath from her lungs. He offered her his arm, and she took it. Around them, she was aware of whispered conversations, curious glances, the barely concealed surprise of the assembled guests. But all she could see was him. You are beautiful, he said quietly, his lips close to her ear. I am terrified, she admitted. Do not be. He covered her hand with his. You belong here, with me. The dinner passed in a blur. Evelyn sat near the center of the table, a position of honor that raised eyebrows among the guests. Sir Edmund glowered from his seat across the table, while Lady Arabella maintained a smile that looked increasingly strained. The conversation was polite, the food excellent, and through it all, the Duke treated Evelyn with a deference that left no doubt about his intentions. It was over dessert that Sir Edmund finally snapped. "I must say, cousin," he announced, his voice carrying down the table, "you have been remarkably mysterious about the purpose of this evening. One might almost think you had something to announce." The room went quiet. Evelyn felt the Duke stiffen beside her, though his expression remained calm. "As it happens," he said, "I do." He set down his fork and rose from his chair. "I have invited you here tonight because I wish to share some news. News that I am sure will be of interest to all of you." He paused, letting the silence stretch. "I intend to marry." A ripple of surprise ran through the guests. Sir Edmund's face broke into a triumphant smile, and Lady Arabella sat up straighter, her eyes gleaming. Evelyn's heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. "And the fortunate lady?" Sir Edmund asked, already looking as though he had won. The Duke turned to Evelyn and extended his hand. She took it, rising to her feet. "Allow me to present Miss Evelyn Hartley," he said, "my daughter's governess, and the woman I intend to make my duchess." The silence that followed was absolute. For a long, terrible moment, no one moved. Then, slowly, Sir Edmund's smile crumbled into something ugly. "You cannot be serious," he said. "A governess? You would marry a servant." "I would marry the woman I love," the Duke said evenly, "and I will thank you to speak of her with respect." Sir Edmund stood, his face florid with fury. "This is an insult to the family name. It is an insult to everything our father built. You would throw away your position, your reputation, your future, for a woman of no fortune, no rank, no connections?" "I would," the Duke said, "and I do not recall asking for your approval." Lady Arabella rose, her smile gone, her face pale with rage. "You have made a fool of me," she said to the Duke. "You allowed me to come here, to hope, when all along you intended this spectacle." "I intended no spectacle," the Duke replied. "I merely wished to make my intentions clear, to everyone." He looked around the table, his gaze steady. "This is the woman I love. This is the woman who will share my life, and help me raise my daughter. Anyone who cannot accept that is welcome to leave." For a moment, no one moved. Then, one by one, the guests began to murmur, to look at one another, to weigh their options. The Duke of Westmarch was one of the wealthiest men in Yorkshire. They might disapprove of his choice, but they would not openly defy him. Not yet. Sir Edmund did not sit down. "This is not over," he said, his voice shaking with rage. "I will fight this. I will go to the trustees. I will see you ruined before I allow a common governess to take my sister's place." The Duke regarded him with cold contempt. "You will do whatever your conscience permits," he said. "But I warn you, cousin, if you attempt to harm my family, I will destroy you." The two men faced each other across the table, and the air crackled with animosity. Then, with a sound of disgust, Sir Edmund threw down his napkin and stormed from the room. Lady Arabella followed a moment later, her silks rustling with barely suppressed fury. The remaining guests sat in stunned silence, watching the Duke as if uncertain what to do. "Ladies and gentlemen," the Duke said, turning back to the table, "I apologize for the interruption. Please, enjoy your dessert." The dinner resumed, but the atmosphere had changed irrevocably. Evelyn sat down slowly, her legs trembling, and felt the Duke's hand close over hers beneath the table. "It will be all right," he said quietly. "I promise you." She wanted to believe him, but as she looked around the room, at the carefully composed faces of the guests, she could not help but wonder what Sir Edmund would do next, and whether the Duke's promise would be enough to protect them from the storm that was coming. The storm came sooner than she expected. 3 days after the dinner, the household was thrown into disarray by the arrival of an unexpected visitor, a solicitor from London, bearing documents that Sir Edmund had filed with the Court of Chancery. He had launched a legal challenge, contesting the Duke's right to marry without the consent of the trustees. His argument was tenuous, based on a clause in the old Duke's will that required any marriage to be approved by the trustees to protect the estate's interests. It was a clause that had been intended to prevent hasty or unsuitable alliances, and Sir Edmund was determined to use it. The Duke was calm when he heard the news. He had expected something like this, but Evelyn could see the tension in his jaw, the tightness around his eyes. She found him in his study later that evening, surrounded by papers, his cravat loosened, his expression grim. "He is trying to destroy us," she said quietly. "He is trying to destroy me," the Duke corrected. "You are merely a convenient weapon." He rose and came to her, taking her hands. "But he has underestimated me. I have spent the past year preparing for this fight. I knew he would not let go easily." "You knew?" "I know my cousin." He led her to a chair by the fire and sat opposite her, still holding her hands. "Sir Edmund has resented me since we were boys. He has always believed that he deserved the estate more than I did, that my father favored him, that I was unworthy. When the old Duke placed him on the board of trustees, it gave him the one thing he had always wanted, power over me." He paused. "But that power is limited. The trusteeship does not give him control of the estate, it merely gives him a voice, and his voice is not enough to stop me from marrying. But the legal challenge will fail." He said it with such certainty that Evelyn almost believed him. "The clause he is citing applies to marriages made without the consent of the trustees. But I am not making a marriage without consent. I am making a marriage with the consent of the majority of the trustees. I have been corresponding with them for months." She stared at him. "You have?" "I knew this moment would come. I prepared for it." He smiled, and there was a glint of satisfaction in his eyes. "Sir Edmund believes he is the only one who can play politics. He is wrong." Over the following weeks, the legal battle unfolded in a flurry of letters and documents. The Duke was tireless, meeting with his lawyers, writing to the trustees, gathering support. 2 of the 3 trustees were elderly men who had served the Westmarch family for decades. They had no love for Sir Edmund, and they respected the Duke. When they learned of the situation, they threw their support behind him. The 3rd trustee, however, was Sir Edmund himself, and he would not be moved. The winter passed slowly. The snow gave way to rain, and the rain to the first tentative signs of spring. Lady Margaret continued her lessons, blissfully unaware of the legal storm raging around her, though she sensed that something was wrong. She asked fewer questions than usual, staying close to Evelyn, as if afraid that the governess might suddenly vanish. "You will not leave, will you?" she asked one afternoon, as they sat together in the garden, watching the first crocuses push through the cold earth. "I will not leave," Evelyn said. "I promised you, did I not? But what if the bad men make you go?" Evelyn's throat tightened. "No one can make me go," she said. "Not while your father and I have anything to say about it." The child nodded, but the worry did not leave her eyes. In March, the legal challenge was dismissed. The court ruled that the Duke's marriage did not require the unanimous consent of the trustees, and that Sir Edmund's attempt to block it was without merit. The decision came by letter, delivered on a bright morning, when the air was soft and the birds were beginning to sing again. The Duke read it in silence, then handed it to Evelyn. "It is over," he said. "He has lost." She read the letter, her hands shaking. "He will not give up so easily." "Perhaps not, but he has no legal ground left. He can bluster and scheme, but he cannot stop us now." He took her face in his hands and kissed her. "We are free, Evelyn, free to marry." They were married in the village church in early summer, surrounded by flowers and the curious eyes of the entire county. Lady Margaret was the only bridesmaid, resplendent in a pale yellow dress that she had chosen herself. She stood beside Evelyn throughout the ceremony, her small face serious, her hand occasionally reaching out to touch the skirt of the bride's gown, as if to reassure herself that this was real. The Duke had never looked happier. He stood at the altar, his grey eyes bright, and when Evelyn walked down the aisle toward him, he smiled with such unguarded joy that several of the guests were moved to tears. And so it was that Miss Evelyn Hartley, daughter of a country physician and former governess, became the Duchess of Westmarch. The world might have been scandalized, but within the walls of Blackmoor Priory there was only happiness. Sir Edmund did not attend the wedding. He had left the county in a fury, vowing to seek his revenge elsewhere, but his schemes had failed. The estate was secure. The succession, while still a matter of some concern, was no longer an immediate threat. The Duke was confident that he would have a son in time. For Evelyn, the months that followed were a time of adjustment. She was no longer a servant but a mistress, expected to manage the household and preside over social gatherings. It was a daunting role, but she approached it with the same quiet determination she had brought to the schoolroom. The staff, who had grown to respect her during her time as governess, rallied around her. The neighbors, who had initially been wary, warmed to her as they saw the Duke's transformation. He was lighter, happier, more present than he had been in years, and Lady Margaret, now simply Margaret to her family, began to bloom. The child had been the first to call Evelyn Mama. It had happened one evening, as Evelyn was tucking her into bed, a few weeks after the wedding. Margaret had looked up at her with those dark, serious eyes and said, "Good night, Mama." Then she had closed her eyes and fallen asleep, leaving Evelyn standing beside the bed, with tears streaming down her face. The Duke had found her in the corridor, weeping. He had taken her in his arms and held her without asking questions, and when she finally told him what had happened, he had smiled and kissed her forehead. "She has chosen you," he said, "as I chose you. We are a family now." A family. It was a word Evelyn had not allowed herself to believe in since her father's death, but now it was true. She had a husband who loved her, a daughter who trusted her, and a home that was finally beginning to feel like her own. One afternoon in late autumn, nearly 2 years after her arrival at Blackmoor Priory, Evelyn stood at the window of the nursery, watching Margaret play in the garden below. The child was older now, taller, her dark hair braided neatly down her back. She was laughing at something, her face bright with joy, and the sound carried up through the open window like music. The Duke came to stand beside her, slipping his arm around her waist. "She is happy," he said. "Yes," Evelyn agreed. "She is. Because of you. Because of both of us." She leaned into him, resting her head against his shoulder. "We did this together." He was quiet for a moment, his hand warm on her hip. "I never thought I would have this," he said at last. "A wife, a daughter, a home that feels like a home. I had resigned myself to a life of duty and solitude, and then you came." "And then I came," she echoed, smiling. He turned her to face him, his hands cupping her face. "I love you," he said, "more than I ever thought possible." "I love you too," she whispered. He kissed her, slow and sweet, and for a long moment they stood there in the soft autumn light, holding each other, while below them their daughter played in the garden and the first leaves of the season drifted down from the trees. In the months that followed, the new Duchess of Westmarch discovered that she was with child. The news was greeted with quiet joy, and the household buzzed with preparations. The Duke was protective, anxious, hovering at her elbow in a way that made her laugh. Margaret was fascinated, asking endless questions about babies, and what they looked like, and whether she would be allowed to hold it. "Of course you will be allowed to hold it," Evelyn said, laughing. "You will be its sister. Will it be a boy or a girl?" "I do not know. We will have to wait and see." Margaret considered this. "I would like a brother," she said, "so that the bad men cannot take the house away." Evelyn felt a pang of sadness. "The bad men are gone, Margaret. Your father has made sure of that." "I know," the child shrugged, "but I would still like a brother." In the spring, Evelyn gave birth to a healthy son. The labor was long and difficult, but she came through it with the same quiet strength she had always possessed. The Duke, who had waited outside the door for hours, was pale with worry by the time it was over. When he was finally allowed into the room, he went straight to Evelyn's side, taking her hand and pressing it to his lips. "You are well?" he asked, his voice rough. "I am tired," she admitted, "but I am well." He looked at the baby, who lay in the crook of her arm, small and perfect, and entirely oblivious to the world. "He is beautiful," he said softly. "He looks like you." "He looks like a wrinkled little turnip," Evelyn said, and the Duke laughed. Margaret was brought in a short time later. She approached the bed with unusual hesitancy, her eyes wide. Evelyn held out her free hand, and the child took it, climbing carefully onto the bed to peer at the baby. "This is your brother," Evelyn said. "His name is William." Margaret looked at the baby for a long time. her small face solemn. Then she reached out and touched his tiny hand, her touch feather-light. "He is very small," she said. "He will grow," Evelyn said. Margaret nodded, then looked up at her mother. Not her governess, not the woman who had come to teach her, but her mother, and smiled. "I am glad he is here," she said. "Now you will always stay." Evelyn's throat tightened. "I would have stayed anyway," she said. "With or without a brother. I promised you, remember?" "I remember," the child said. "But now you have even more reason." The Duke came to stand at the foot of the bed, watching them with a look of such tenderness that Evelyn felt her heart swell. This was her family. This was her home. This was the life she had never dared to imagine, and it was hers. In the years that followed, the Duke of Westmarch and his Duchess remained at Blackmoor Priory, raising their children and managing their estate with a steadiness that earned them the respect of all who knew them. Sir Edmund Blount continued to brood in London, but his schemes had come to nothing. The estate prospered under the Duke's careful stewardship, and the succession was secure. Margaret grew into a clever, capable young woman. She retained the qualities that had made her childhood so difficult: the sensitivity, the intensity, the tendency to notice things others missed. But she learned to channel them into pursuits that brought her joy. She became an accomplished musician, a skilled reader of character, and a devoted sister to her younger siblings. And Evelyn, who had arrived at Blackmoor Priory as a lonely governess, with nothing but a worn travelling cloak and a determination to survive, found that she had been given everything she had ever wanted: a husband who loved her, a daughter who trusted her, a son who adored her, a home that was truly hers. She often thought of that first evening, when she had stood in the great hall and looked up at the small, silent girl on the staircase. She had not known then that she was looking at her future, but she knew it now. On a warm summer evening, many years later, the Duke and Duchess of Westmarch stood together on the terrace, watching their children play on the lawn below. The sound of laughter drifted up through the golden light, and the air smelled of roses and freshly cut grass. The Duke took his wife's hand, and she leaned her head against his shoulder. "Are you happy?" he asked. She considered the question, turning it over in her mind. Then she smiled. "Yes," she said. "I am happy." And she was. If you enjoyed this story, let me know in the comments. Do you believe Evelyn and the Duke were truly meant to be, or was their love simply born from circumstance and loneliness? I would also love to hear your thoughts on Margaret. Was she your favorite character, and did her journey from a misunderstood, silent child to a confident young woman move you as much as it moved me? If you were in Evelyn's position, would you have dared to love a duke, knowing the entire world might turn against you? Or would fear have kept you silent? Comment your answers below. I read every single one, and your insights often inspire the next story I tell. If you believe in second chances, in love that defies class and expectation, and in the quiet strength of a woman who refuses to be broken, then like this video, share it with someone who needs a reminder that love can find us in the most unexpected places, and subscribe so you never miss the next tale.